Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3752. Today's date is December 10, 2025. It's been almost like a morning at 8:52 a.m. All right. Now, because of kind of like a only winter, my days actually started very late. No, it's not really happened late. Like I usually wake up 7 a.m. Okay, yeah, but it's kind of like a really cold now. I cannot able to kind of like a get out from my bed. One thing, another thing, even if I get out, I just kind of like a reluctant to not to do any kind of like a silly work. It just I don't want to. It's just like that now. I just want kind of like a warm and things like that, because everything is around here is kind of like a very cold and stuff like that. So it kind of like a make my morning little bit late. Okay, so that's why I'm kind of like the recording artifact at this hour. Okay, yeah. But usually I kind of like a wake up and kind of like a sleep till 8. Yeah, it everything has to happen. Whatever. Should we jump into the question? Let's go. Alright. The question is, what if music control emotions? Oh, that is a really good question. Alright, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question are always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force you to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, how? Pause for a while, okay? All right, sorry for this disturbance, things like that. Okay, where was I? Okay, I was actually talking about the question is what if music could control the emotion? Okay, yeah. All right. So what is at least this question? Why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force you to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, or when I try to create that reality, I'm kind of like utilizing my knowledge and information that I've been through. And somehow it kind of like feel really good to utilizing my knowledge and information to kind of like give this particular answer. It felt somewhat something good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. It's just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. All right. So what I was kind of like talking about, I was actually talking about regarding over the question. The question says that what if music could control your emotions? Does music control your emotions? Well, in somewhat something, but not entirely. Okay, yeah. Actually, our emotions control music. It's not a music control our emotions. Okay, yeah. It's kind of like a happening both way. Okay, yeah. Example is this thing. You are happy, so you kind of like play some song. Let's just say Punjabi Dhol mix song. Okay, yeah. So when you listen this song, you are kind of like a happy, and you are kind of like a happy even more. So let's just say that you are happy means 10 out of 5. You play this song Dhol mix, and kind of like instantly you are kind of like a happy mode 10 out of 10. So probably it's kind of like a something is this thing, a compounding effect is actually happened. A compounding or whatever it's called is a it's kind of like a simply you a momentum is actually happened. Yeah, it's kind of like a simply you press the button, and whatever the emotions that you have, it kind of like a simply um, extend even more further. Okay, yeah. Let's just say you are sad and you kind of like play some sort of sad, so you will kind of like become even more sad. Okay, you are kind of like happy, you kind of like play idiom, you are kind of like become even more happier. Okay, yeah. You are kind of like a focus, you kind of like a focus music, and you are kind of like a simply just even more focus and things like that. So this is what kind of like a things is actually happened. This is what kind of like a simply emotions are kind of like a triggered music, and music is kind of like a triggered our emotions, right? Yeah. But music is not kind of like a simply detect our emotion. Let me give you perspective. It actually kind of like a simply it actually happened when the emotion of the song and the emotion that you are feeling is kind of like a exactly same, then you kind of like a resonate. But if you are not resonating this thing, then it does not work. Example: you are sad, you went to club, It does not work for you. You might gonna dance, you might gonna kind of like relax and things like that, but still your mind and conscious are not meant to be kind of like a hearing EDM song. No, nothing at all. Same thing with the kind of like a different thing. Okay, yeah. Let's just say you are kind of like a somebody really happy and you are kind of like listening sad song, so it just kind of like a feel really weird. Another thing is that ki you might gonna hurt, but you might gonna listen this particular song, but still it's not okay, it's not really work out. Okay, yeah, it kind of like a feel really off and things like that. Now there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Okay, yeah, what I'm saying song or what I'm saying music is what you think. You think about a kind of like a music that you kind of like a listen from some sort of artist or things or that. Yeah, like there is also kind of like a way. But the songs, let's just say there is a kind of like a new song from Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is an artist, by the way, and she kind of like a made a music, a song. That song is a kind of like a heartbroken and things and that and that. Now, does it resonate? It does not, because I didn't really kind of like heartbroken, nothing really at all. Okay, yeah. So it does not represent me, whatever. But this is kind of like a simply the song that she made. Okay, yeah. But what I'm trying to tell you is this thing: the song that you are kind of like listening, like a Taylor Swift or multiple artists, you just resonate. Maybe let's just say kind of like a let's just say little bit. Okay, not too much. If you wanted to kind of like really wanted to experience the emotion, like basically the sound or music is kind of like to represent your emotions or uplift the emotions, you just have to kind of like go to the listen some sort of other territories, and that territory doesn't really dictate by the artist or any kind of like a something any kind of like a somebody the singer or things. No, it dictate by the music, it dictate by the composer, it dictate by the music director. Okay, I don't know how we're supposed to, there are multiple designation regarding about that. Okay, I am kind of like somebody recommend to you listen kind of like a one artist song. Okay, Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer is not a singer. Okay, yeah, he is a music composer, he creates the music. And boy oh boy, dude, listen his music. Like legitimately, this is whatever the emotions that you have. Like basically, as I mentioned, now if you are happy, then you might not gonna listen the sad song, or if you are kind of like a sad, you might not gonna listen the happy song. Okay, yeah, like this actually happened with the song, but the soundtrack or the way that Hans Zimmer create the music, oh my god, it is kind of like somebody went into the another era of kind of like a thought process, and I just kind of like a blows my mind. I don't know, every single time I kind of like heard his music, and it just felt like mother of god, like literally just like that. Now I just like, I don't know how do I supposed to explain. It's kind of like a thing that now you music cannot able to explain through words, and this is what kind of like a thing, this is what kind of like something you feel when you heard the Hans Zimmer music. Yeah, like he is not a kind of like a world famous you might gonna know, but probably you might gonna listen his song, not song or music. Pirates of the Caribbean. You probably heard this song. Obviously, you watched the Pirates of the Caribbean. This is kind of like a theme song, which kind of like made by Hans Zimmer. Man of Steel, Interstellar. Like these are kind of like one of the, and there are so many movies he kind of like made a soundtrack, which is kind of like a really great. It kind of like uplifts our emotions to the kind of like somebody took us to the kind of like a somewhere that he just kind of like pump up and things and that. It just, boy oh boy, it felt really good. And not just kind of like I'm kind of like recommending to the Hans Zimmer, any kind of like a person who's kind of like a creating kind of a score or background score, that particular person who is kind of like a somebody hand in music in such a way that it kind of like somebody creates some magic. It just blend and things and that. And in this particular situation, even if you're happy, you can kind of like somebody listen that sad song, because the sad song is not meant to be kind of like somebody feel really sad. The way that those people are kind of like manipulate with the notes and beats with such a way that it felt like you are actually connect. Okay, let me tell you one thing. The average music, that average song that you are kind of like listening is closely less than 4 minutes, like a 2 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes. Okay, yeah, less than that. But soundtrack length are started from 7 minutes to 12 minutes to 14 minutes. These are the average time, by the way, for the soundtrack, and it takes that much amount of time. Okay, to kind of like somebody connect the emotions and kind of like a resonate and let that kind of like a carry the emotion to the uplift in a such a way that it just blended. So soundtrack or background score is always in the kind of like a very long length, and obviously at the beginning it was kind of like somebody so mellow that you just might not hear what you are kind of like listening, but give it a time, you just kind of like understand and things like that. Now, why is this actually happen? Why does we kind of like somebody associate with the music a lot? Okay, I don't know. I don't really have any kind of like a thought process regarding. I'm trying to tell you my experience, what I've been through, and things like that. Okay, yeah. So music is not meant to be kind of like something we invented. No, music is kind of like a things that keep creating sound with multiples of different pattern. Example is this thing that if I kind of like do this. By the way, if you are hearing this thing or not, I'm kind of like a tapping my kind of like a mobile screen, but whatever. Okay, yeah, you are kind of like creating music by this, like, no, this is kind of like a, just a pattern that you are kind of like somebody putting something, something, but it creates something called as a little bit music. It's not kind of like somebody completes the same music, but it kind of like a somebody add rhythm. Okay, if I'm gonna say rhythm, and this is what exactly happened almost like a millions of years ago. Well, people are kind of like really bored, and people are kind of like realize that if they kind of like somebody hit some sort of object at particular random, like particular in pattern, it kind of like emits some sort of sound which feel really good, Okay, now that sound is kind of like a different from where you hit the object or what kind of like object that you hit. Example is this thing: if you kind of like hit the drum, it kind of like a thing boom, boom, boom. If you kind of like hit some sort of kind of like a solid thing, it's kind of like a put. There's a multiple sound is actually emitted from the multiple sounds and things like that, which kind of like simply represent that, oh, it's really good. So why not we do this thing? So probably we are started doing this thing, and then suddenly we are kind of like a mumbling things like that, like whatever the language that we are kind of like speaking, we are kind of like a mumbling our language into this particular music, and it kind of like a create the song. By the way, it's not actually happened just kind of like a couple of seconds or couple of minutes or couple of days. No, it actually happened millions of years. Okay, yeah, like basically people started kind of like doing this kind of like things and that, then we made an instrument, then we are kind of trying to mumbling things and that. It's a lot of time. So that's why there is no kind of like particular person who kind of like invented the music. It's not, the music is not invention, it's a part of the human thing. Okay, yeah, and it's part of human thing would kind of like resonate with this particular thought process and things like that. Okay, now the main question actually arises that why we are kind of like simply listen music, why we connect emotions. Yeah, why is that thing? Like basically, if I'm kind of like simply listening any kind of like a lecture or things like that, I does not feel anything at all. So why specifically music? Okay, what exactly is this thing? Music is kind of like a things that it's something very differently. I don't know how do I supposed to explain. If you are kind of like listening this thing, it's very boring. Okay, why are you listening this thing at this moment? I'm not really sure. But if you are kind of like listening this thing, there is nothing really at all. You just kind of like hearing my voice and things and nothing really at all. But if I add a kind of like little bit music, let's just say that if I kind of like speak something very different way, let's just say that, okay, today I'm gonna speak something very differently. Let's just talk about some sort of sex. Oh my god, let's talk about sex. Okay, listen, the first time I kind of like had a sex, it was like, oh boy, fuck, is this good, man? Will you suck my ball? Oh fuck. Okay, yeah. For this particular paragraph, have you ever understand my emotions? Okay, obviously these emotions represent horny. Okay, but from this particular point of perspective, I kind of like simply utilize a multiple kind of like simply a pitch. Like my voice is kind of like a look like this, like a mellow and kind of like a talk like a kind of like a secret stuff. And when I talk about kind of like a some sexual thing, it just kind of like a feel that I am exaggerating my stuff, that I feel oh my god, I feel good, nice. I don't know how I'm supposed to explain. I just ejaculate. Okay, so do you understand the kind of like a depth and feel and things like that? Obviously, it's kind of like a feel. This is what exactly happened with the music. Okay, like if you like basically the normal way of communication, it's just a normal way of communication. Okay, it just doesn't really have a kind of like a things and that. A very good speaker or very good leader kind of like utilize their kind of like a something power and empathy to utilize in some sort of words that kind of like a feel like great example. Okay, yeah. Go to the YouTube and kind of like suddenly search about Hitler's speech. Okay, yeah. Now listen that video. Okay, listen that video. If you don't understand German, doesn't really matter. But still, you could understand how much he put the empathy in every words. The way that he speak, the way that Hitler guy, that particular person, Hitler guy, like really fucked up person by the way, but he was the way that he kind of like doing a speech, amazing. And this is what kind of like is only considered as a good leader. Even if you don't really understand the language, you could understand his emotions, the way that he kind of like a pump up the kind of like a people by his speech and things like that. It felt like, yeah, why is this thing, why is that? I'm trying to cracking this kind of like only I kind of like understand that why does kind of like some people like talk kind of like something very just mellow, but some people kind of like talk with the emotions and things like that. Because when we talk through emotions, our notes, our intensity, our kind of like a way that we talk change, and that's what kind of like consider as a kind of like a somebody good leader. Okay, the way that you communicate. Why? Because it understand people. Okay, let me tell you. Okay, let me give you another example. Okay, go to the YouTube, search about Hitler's speech. Okay, watch that speech. Okay, watch that particular video. You might feel that, boy, this particular guy is really fucked up. Okay, now what fucked up means like a very kind of like a powerful and things like that. Okay, now what you have to do is that you just kind of like somebody search about a kind of like a speech from parliament. Okay, let's just take a kind of like somebody Indian parliament speech, any kind of like a random speech, or maybe if you're from US or Europe, then probably search about the speech in Congress. Okay, and kind of like somebody, the person who is kind of like reading a script. Now listen that particular tone. Okay, and listen that the Hitler that they kind of like a talk. When the Hitler kind of like a speech, his speech is kind of like connect through emotion. There are a lot of variation actually happen in kind of like somebody the kind of like a words and things like that. But when the person who's kind of like reading the kind of like a script, everything is just mellow. You just kind of, there is no ups and downs. There is nothing really at all, and it kind of like somebody feel like a kind of like somebody just narrow. It's felt like, yeah, it just felt like that boring and things like that. Okay, if you still not really understand, I am kind of like giving you another example. Okay, let's just say you are kind of like driving a car and there is a road, a straight road for almost like a 200 kilometer. There is no left and right turn, nothing really at all, and you just have to drive straight for almost like a 200-300 kilometer. Now probably you cannot able to drive for almost like a 200-300 kilometers straight. Why? Because it felt like that nothing is actually changing. You just kind of like put the pedal on the kind of like accelerator and nothing really at all. It just felt like that boring things. You might gonna lose your consciousness or you might gonna sleep, because it's really not. Okay, really not. But when you try to drive from kind of like somebody, let's just say a mountain climbing or ghat, I'm not really sure what exactly word for ghat. Ghat is a kind of like a road to kind of like reach to the top of the mountain. So the roads are kind of like a very narrow or kind of like a very bendy or things like that. So when you are kind of like driving from this, you are kind of like exhilarating from lot of thought process. You just feel like that, oh, left and right and this and that. Oh my god, you are kind of like driving like a really crazy, man, and you just felt like that, whoa, this is really good. And this is what kind of like our mind are kind of like a bend in such a way. Let me give you perspective. Our mind, it just does not meant to be kind of like somebody consume such a thing that kind of like somebody just such a kind of like somebody just a boring. Okay, boring means what? A kind of like somebody just a thing that come out and it doesn't really change anything at all. It just, yeah, a kind of like somebody, the person who's kind of like reading a script, or kind of like somebody just driving a car in straight line. It just felt like boring, really boring. But when you are driving kind of like in a mountain, or when you are kind of like hearing Hitler's speech, it kind of like a different, it kind of like felt that a pattern, ups and downs and things like that. Okay, yeah, and this is what I'm trying to tell you, a pattern. Okay, yeah, that's why we are humans, and we are kind of like somebody really love pattern. Okay, yeah, a pattern. In this particular pattern, sometimes we are high, sometimes we are low, sometimes, yeah, it kind of like represent through multiple activity, through communication, the way that I'm trying to tell you, a Hitler speech. Okay, yeah, kind of like the way that you are driving in the mountain, Okay. And basically, yeah, and the music too, because music is a kind of like a combination of multiple patterns too. Okay, yeah, there is ups, there is a downs, and there is a kind of like a really low. Now those patterns are actually created by the multiple instruments, guitar, tabla, there is a lot of kind of like instrument, EDM. Those are things which kind of like creates the pattern. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, if the pattern is kind of like simply just a normal, let's just say that pattern is a +5 -5 +5 -5 +5 -5, it became boring too. Okay, even if there is a kind of like a slightly changes, but it felt boring. A pattern means sometimes it kind of like a +5, then -2, then +10, then +4, then +7, then -21. Like this is kind of like a pattern that we are kind of like a bending. Okay, and that's why our mind is kind of like a towards to listening those pattern, and it kind of like a felt really good. It kind of like a felt that change, and it kind of like resonate through music a lot. Okay, and that's why we love music. Yeah, that's why we love music. That's why we just kind of like somebody just, and when this kind of like a pattern is kind of like a happen, we connect our emotions, because our emotions are represented through our pattern too. Okay, yeah. In our emotions, let's just say I am broken up. So when I'm broken up, I kind of like feel really sad and things like that. Now when I kind of like listening the sad music kind of like a bend into the pattern in such a way that kind of like a felt like a alone, and kind of like somebody is this thing, it kind of like complement our emotions, and when it complement, you feel more sadness. And this is what kind of like some of these songs are kind of like a dictate our emotion in that point of perspective. That's why we love music and things like that. Like I didn't really found any kind of like a person who kind of like hate music. Probably is this, and basically is this, let me tell you one thing, music is a universal language. God knows where you are, where are you from, what kind of like a language that you speak. Music is a kind of like a language that you understand. Example, you play dhol mix, probably everyone will gonna happy. Don't matter who's that particular person came from, even from Antarctica or even from kind of like a US or kind of like a Caribbean island or whatever it is. That particular person will gonna happy if I kind of like a play that whole mix, which is kind of like a Punjabi mix. Okay, yeah. Now this is where it is. Music is a universal language, and even if you don't really understand the language, we still connect with that particular song. Okay, song or music or things like that, right? Now the question is that what if a kind of like a music control our emotions? Now I try to tell you regarding about this thing. Okay, yeah. Now what if we could kind of like assembly we could kind of like assembly is this thing, what is that the question? Sorry, I forget the question. The question was that what if the music control our emotions? Well, if the music control our emotions, then probably there is a lot of thing will gonna happen. Example, okay, yeah. When you went to the concert, obviously you are expecting to be a kind of like a sort of pump up music, and they cater that pump up music too, and it kind of like a feel really happy and things and that. Now the concert creator, the people who kind of like had a concert, they kind of like mentioned that what if I would kind of like somebody change the kind of like a tone and things like that. People still might gonna resonate. Okay, yeah, let me tell you the perspective. Okay, yeah, as I mentioned, okay, our emotions carry through music, right? It kind of like a uplift. If you're happy, you're gonna become more happy. If you're sad, you're gonna become even more sad. Okay, yeah. Now there is also another thing. When you are kind of like experiencing the music with multiple people around you, then your emotions are even more higher than that. Even if you don't really connect, even if you kind of like a things that keep, okay, it's very hard to explain. Let me give you the perspective. Let me give you the my example that what I've been through. Couple of years ago, me and my friend are a kind of like a went to watch movie named Bajrangi Bhaijaan. Bajrangi Bhaijaan is a kind of like a some Bollywood movie. This movie is kind of like a based by a kind of like a girl who's kind of like a trap in India. She's from Pakistan, and she's almost like a 9-year-old girl. Okay, yeah. Now basically she cannot able to speak. Now our protagonist Salman Khan, who is kind of like a somebody, make sure that particular girl should supposed to went to the Pakistan. Now the problem is that India and Pakistan is a kind of like an evil country. Like they both the country are kind of like somebody hate each other and things like that. Now in this particular context, in this particular scenario, that particular person wanted to do things like he wanted to kind of like somebody safely transfer that particular girl into the kind of like somebody Pakistan to her parents and things like that. Now this movie kind of like tell the journey regarding about what exactly happened and things and that and that. Now in at the end of the movie, okay, yeah, that particular girl cannot able to speak throughout the entire movie, but at that night, when at that end of the day, when kind of like he realized that now she reached to his parents, she reached to her parents, and kind of like I have to kind of like away from her and kind of like things and that, and there is an emotional moment actually happen at that moment. Okay, yeah, when she first time say mama and things like that, because Amir Khan wanted to say that he wanted to represent to me as a mama and things like that. So basically, is that that girl first time she kind of like say mama, and the entire kind of like a theater went crying. Okay, literally all my friends are crying. I was like, what the fuck was that? It's not really that. I'm not really crying. I also got emotions too, but still is this thing. It's not really that emotions so that I was supposed to be crying. But some people crying. Okay, yeah, and not just all my friends. There are all of people who are kind of like crying over there. Like, oh my god, this is a very emotional, intense moment, dude. Okay, yeah. So what is it? What I'm trying to tell you? Okay, yeah. As I mentioned, is this thing that our emotions represent through music. Okay, yeah. But when you are trying to experience that particular music with so many of people, then probably what exactly happened that it complement that emotions even more, and it kind of like simply let you do kind of like a physical thing, let you kind of like express your emotions to physical activity. Example, crying. Okay, yeah. Because of this kind of like suddenly in this particular moment, the sad scene, and kind of like it felt like that yeah. So basically, if you are crying, the kind, if you are not crying, okay, you are just kind of you are literally sad and emotion, but you are not crying, but suddenly you can kind of like see that there are kind of like hundreds of people are crying, then you have started crying too. Because our emotions are complement by looking at each other. Okay, yeah, because we derive from people around us. Okay, yeah, and our emotions are actually represented by the people around us. Okay, if the hundreds of people are actually crying, then even if you not want to cry, but still you are kind of emotion and you might gonna kind of like cry a little bit. Okay, yeah. Same thing happened in the concert. Let's just say you are in concert, everyone are dancing, and everyone kind of like somebody just doing like really crazy shit and stuff. Obviously, you will not gonna kind of like stand still and looking at them. No, you will gonna dance too. Okay, because it just think that this is our human activity, our human emotions are kind of like this will be represented through community. Like basically, if the hundreds of people who are kind of like dancing, you are not might just kind of like stand there and kind of like not do anything. Obviously, you will gonna dance. Okay, yeah. But what if I'm kind of like really sad, like I had a breakup, I went to the concert, and basically everyone kind of like dancing. So should I supposed to be dance? You will definitely gonna dance, dude. You will definitely gonna dance, even if you don't really have kind of like a thought process things that, but still you will gonna dance. Why? Because it's our kind of like a mechanism inside our brain that we just kind of like replicate through the community of the people, and that's what it is. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing regarding about the question says that what is the actually point that I'm trying to tell you. The point that I'm trying to tell you is this thing is our emotions are kind of like if our music can kind of control our emotions. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing, if the kind of like a music is kind of like a put in our earphone, then probably it's very difficult to control humans. Why? Because difficult to control emotions, because as I mentioned, when you try to listen to music on our earphone, we have complete control of what we are kind of like hearing, things like that. But what if I could kind of like play DJ and sound like that in front of hundreds of people? Obviously hundreds of people cannot able to control those kind of like a sound, that kind of like things like that. Now when this thing actually happen, then you can kind of like control our emotions. Example, concert. Okay, yeah. Even if you cannot even if you had a breakup and things like that, but still the kind of like some of the concert people who are kind of like a lead to the EDM and things like that, obviously you will gonna dance, obviously you will gonna control these things. So that's why in this particular context, the EDM people actually control your emotions, even if you don't want to, but still they control your emotions through the music. Right? Yeah. This is the way that you could do this thing. Okay, yeah. But still it's not possible in kind of like in somewhat something real way, because let me tell you one thing. Okay, yeah. Yeah, we could uplift our emotions through music, which is true, but our action also kind of like represent by the community activity, which is also true, by the way. But still the sense of what we are doing, these are kind of like still always present. Okay, what is at least sense? A sense means like that key. Example is this thing, even if I am sad, like I am heartbroken, and EDM music is kind of like a pumping up, and I'm kind of like a dancing. Okay, yeah. My body language represents that I'm dancing. My facial structure represents that I'm dancing, kind of like happy, but my mind is still low. I am still kind of like a suffering from heartbroken, and I'm kind of like simply hiding this pain by this kind of like simply fake stuff, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, when you are kind of like simply with the community of hundreds of people who are dancing, obviously you will gonna dance because you wanted to be part of that community, but still inside your mind you are kind of like a feel really sad. Okay, yeah. And this is what kind of like simply our body is kind of like bend in that way, since we actually have a sense of consciousness. Probably we understand ourselves much better. We does not dictate emotions in our, yeah, like basically sometimes emotions, yeah, emotions are kind of like really good, but sometimes it does not. If you don't really understand what I'm trying to tell you, okay, yeah, imagine you are driving a car, okay, yeah, or driving a bike, let's just say, and you are listening music. Let's take a kind of like a EDM music, Linkin Park. Okay, yeah, you are listening music, a numb. Okay, yeah, and the numb music are kind of like a very rocking and things like that. You just feel like ooh ah ooh ah ooh ah, and suddenly you pump up the speed. Let's just say 40 to 40, 60, 70, 80 kilometer, 90 kilometer, 100 kilometer. You are driving 100 kilometer per hour and you are listening music. Obviously road is empty, so that is okay, but suddenly there is somebody actually came in front of you. You just put the pedal in the brake, kind of like a make sure that your car or your bike should supposed to be stop at particular period of time, or you try to prevent that accident as quickly as possible as it can. Why is this actually happen? Is because of sense of consciousness that we have. Because of this thing, even if the emotions dictate, even if the music dictate our emotions, but sense of consciousness are let you to alive at the presence of the moment, and it does not kind of like a deflect you. If something is actually happened wrong, your entire body structure have kind of like a power inside of you, kind of like a simply save you from kind of like a less harm thing will gonna happen. And this is what actually happened. Okay, yeah. So even if, like, I don't know, like, have you ever experienced this thing? I'm kind of like trying to tell you from my point of perspective. Like suddenly it's actually happened, something kind of like came in front of me, I put the pedal on the brake, how much hard I could put, and this actually happened with everyone. I actually experienced this thing, and you also probably experienced that thing too. Okay, yeah. So the question is that can music control our emotions? Yeah, but not entirely. Okay, yeah, it is true. Yes, music control our emotions, which is true, but not entirely. Okay, yeah, we have humans too, and we have sense of consciousness. That's why we call it as alive, na? Okay, that's why we kind of like alive and things like that, right? It kind of like represent that we are alive, and yeah. Oh my god, I'm just feel like that I'm kind of like a talking like kind of like a scientist kind of like a person who's kind of like a talking shit. By the way, don't trust me. I am not that particular person. I'm just telling my just experience what I've been through. Alright, this is it. I should supposed to be end here, and thank you.